Hi everyone, I've already had an introduction, but I'll introduce myself again. I'm John Galloway, a consultant at Doza. So I'm going to talk to you today about building for native apps, web, and the server. And this is all using a new technology available from Expo Router v3. So let's start from the very beginning. How do people spend their time online? And using this data, admittedly it's a little bit old, this is 2023, we have 50% mobile devices, 40% laptop, and 3% tablets. And if we take a graph over time, they are leveling off, but there was a big crossover point in around 2017 when mobile devices really overtook laptops for how people spend their time online. How are people spending their time online, I hear you ask? Lucky for us, mobile apps are pretty common. A lot of this is taken up, admittedly, by your YouTubes and your Facebooks. But if you look at the amount of network traffic going through people's phones, 90% of it is mobile apps, and 10% is mobile web. Ooh, I put a ding. So that shows us that mobile web is not enough. People want the most native experience possible and the controls that come with that. People want native apps. So you shouldn't be asking yourself, should I build an app or should I build a website? You should be thinking, I want to build both, to not risking sort of alienating half our user base. Often there's a big overlap between the app and the website experience. I've got a couple of examples here. Netflix, web and mobile are both video players. Sure, that's an oversimplification. There's a lot of nuances there. Spotify, the web player plays the songs and you log into your account. What does your mobile app do? Very similar stuff, but you can add some extra functionality like offline playlists and things like that. So this is great. This is an oversimplification, but it's worth understanding some of the nuances of these platforms. Fortunately, React Native developers are in luck, as code sharing is built in. Bare bones React Native already builds for two different platforms, for iOS and Android. With React Native Web, we can also build for the browser. This means that code sharing is already possible. However, it's the nuances I mentioned before that require a lot of work to understand and address. When I say nuances, I'm referring to things that can't be shared. As we're running JavaScript on the web browser, I'm going to try my pointer. Can you see a red line? No. It goes. It's too faint. I want to access window.location. That just doesn't make sense out of that context. On native, another example is haptics. You're going to have your desktop vibrating at you? Probably not. And secrets. Do you want to put your secrets on the client side, like your database key? Probably not as well. So when I say nuances, it's understanding those specific features for that platform. So let's draft up a code sharing wish list. Putting together an ideal wish list. I want a single code base, and I don't want a monorepo with everything bashed in it, or just an internal package. I want to be able to build separately and deploy separately. So I've got this one this one code base, and I can build my website when I need to, or my Android app when I need to, or whatever. I want to be able to use haptics for mobile, window location for web, and secrets on my server. And more importantly, I want the look and feel to be fitting to that platform. An extra bonus would be if I could integrate easily between my web and native apps. It's quite a lot to ask for. It's a big sharing wish list, but we're ambitious as engineers. Now let's see how Expo Router v3 can make those a reality. Probably worth mentioning, if you don't know what Expo is, it's the framework we use and a platform for building React Native apps. It's very powerful in spinning up, developing, and deploying these apps. I built a very pretty app, isn't it gorgeous? It's pretty straightforward. I have a stack of 2 screens here. I have a home screen, which lists out some products, and I have a screen where I navigate to it by tapping on a product, and it shows me the details for that product. Very simple. If you know your React navigation, this will look fairly obvious to you. You define your 2 new screens, your home screen and your product screen. In the app TSX is the main entry point for the application. So this is where I define the navigation container and the stack navigator. Basically, I want to define how it's all going to be laid out, and in this case, it's the stack. If I was going to do this with Expo Router, notice we don't have an app TSX, but an app folder. The app folder will be the basis for our routing, and we also have our 2 pages, the index page that will map to the home route, and the product page that will map to the product route. Notice there is more than one file. There's also that underscore layout file. you can see that. It's in red, helpfully. This is really the key to making file-based routing possible. In this layout file, I'm importing the stack from Expo Router, and I'm defining all the routes that I want to be in that stack. Notice I'm not listing out everything here. It's actually detected that information from its directory. In most cases, though, you'll want to do some customization, so just having that tag of a stack isn't enough here. So this is more of a practical case. I'm defining the screens in my stack, and in this case, I've given them some more options, and that's just the name, index, and product. Cool. So if we want to navigate, with React Navigation, you're probably familiar with using the use navigation hook here, like I am on the top. And using navigation.navigate, from there you can pass the screen you want to navigate to and any parameters. So when you attach open product there, it takes you to that product page. With Expo Router, navigation isn't URL-based. So every single screen is defined by a unique URL. Sorry, it is URL-based. So every screen is defined by a unique URL. So you wanted to navigate with a button, you can surround that pressable area with a link, or in this case I've done a text. I've surrounded this text with a link, and it will take it to that specific screen. You can also do it programmatically in a similar way here. You've got use navigation. Here you can use the use router hook to navigate to another screen. So what about dynamic routes? So that's all very nice and simple. Let's say I wanted to navigate to a product with its ID being dynamic. You might be able to win a Google Developer hoodie at the end of this slide, just to warm up. You can turn any folder into dynamic route by surrounding its file with the braces, sorry, any file. In this case, I've created a dynamic route by surrounding the file name ID with braces, and here products 123 would map to the ID in this route. Now in the index.tsx of that file, I can get the information of, well, this is me navigating to it, and in the next slide, I'll show you how you can access that route that's given to it. Just out of interest, does this sort of brackets around a file look familiar to anybody? Yeah. Raise a hand, and you might get chosen for a potential to win a hoodie. You, sir. You had your hand up? What does it look like? Yeah, Next.js. Give that man a hoodie. So what have they done? They've really ripped off Next.js, which is good. If you ask me, that's good. They've seen something that works really well, stolen that idea, and jabbed it into Expo Router v3. It's like if you see something that's good and you steal it, in tech, it's not always the end of the world. And inside this dynamic route, I can access the ID by using that hook, use local search params. So there I am. I can see the product ID on the screen. So the thing to bear in mind is Expo Router is built on top of React Navigation. So anything you can do in React Navigation, you can do with Expo Router. However, you get some extra things, sparkle, sparkle. Creating web-specific components. So you can see here, I've got a component called qrcode.tsx. In React Native, you've probably encountered having separate components for iOS and Android. How do you handle that? There's a couple of ways, really. But sometimes you'll have a .iOS or a .android extension, and it'll be bundled up as appropriate for whatever platform you're building for. Now you can do the same for web and native. You can use the web or native extension from the project, and the project bundles it up as appropriate. So I've got 3 examples here. This could be, obviously there wouldn't be any layout in this, but this could be a component used for both of them, like a high order component. In this case, this is how I want it to lay out for native, and this is web. And then if you really need to, you could lay it out for each platform. So the great thing about this is, because you know when you're using a web-specific component, you can start using web-specific tools, things like HTML. So here I am, I've got qrcode.web. I'm using a div. I couldn't do that before. With Expo Router, with this bundling technique, you can. So when it comes to building screens on your website and mobile app, it often makes sense to share screens in your URLs. It doesn't always make sense to have the exact same navigation. So if I look at this example here that I built, another beautiful example by me, it's a 2-tab bottom layout. And this is probably what you want for native apps. Our web users probably aren't too used to seeing this. You're used to being able to scroll all to the bottom of the website, seeing a footer, at the top of your website, there's a header. These aren't usually the things you want to be building for your website. if you're a mobile app, but you do want in your website. This is where layout files come in handy. The layout files, I can simply check if I'm on the web or mobile platform and render the screens or a stack or a tab as appropriate. So there, you can see I'm checking, what's my platform OS? I'm web, I'll do a stack. Oh, if I'm on mobile, I'll render some tabs. This also works the other way. You can kind of conditionally add things. So when I mentioned in that earlier example, I want a footer on my website, but I don't want on my mobile app, I can check my platform as web and conditionally add a footer to that component if it's needed. Cool. So, chat to a few people about this earlier, actually. What would a more complicated example look like? And I thought it was worth adding this in here because all the code on the slides has been very sort of digestible. But what could this look like in the real world? So this is rendering a /blog root, this directory structure here. So how does that work out? It starts from the app folder for your slash, and it's just a grouping. Then we go into the blog and then we go into the home folder. However, as it's in brackets, it's not used, so you could group more things into there, and then it will go into the blog folder. In terms of layouts, it kind of works from outside inwards. So you go the top layout, the next level in, and then finally the index of the blog file. That might all be very garbled, but it's kind of good to see what a more complicated file-based routing URL would look like and how it would work. This kind of begs another question. Could we have platform-specific routes? I only want this URL for my website. I only want this URL for my app. You can't do that, sadly. So on the left, a very crude example, hello.web, buy.native. You can't do that. But fortunately, Expo Router does give us a good fallback. So if you detect that you're on a route that you shouldn't be on the platform, well, if I detect I'm on a route that doesn't work with that platform, so on the right here, I'm sort of saying, oh, I'm on web, I shouldn't be here. Please redirect away to the 404 page. So when it comes to writing server code with React Native, it's always been a bit of a pain, or not really something we'll do. React Native is inherently for building front-end apps. And we're writing front-end code. And we don't have any servers flying around, so what do we usually do? We open a separate repo, we open a separate Node app, its own separate deployments and everything like that. With Expo Router v3, though, you can write your server code in your React Native codebase. How does this work? This is in beta. I should have a beta slash there. So the first thing to do in your app.json is set your web output to server. This tells the bundler that it's enabled this feature, this beta feature. And I've got an interesting API example here. So I've added cart plus API to my project. So React Native will know, okay, this is plus API, so you're building an API route. If I was running this on my local host, it'd be localhost/cart. And then you can do get and post requests by exporting them as async JavaScript functions. So I've got two very basic examples here. It's a get request. Let's assume you go to a database, but here it's just returning an empty array. And in this post request example that I made, it's really just inspecting the request body and returning that to the user, but it's a good example of that. So that is pretty powerful. I mean, can you imagine developing a mobile app and then have it talk to your own server? We may or may not have done that before, but it's made a lot simpler here. Do you want all these servers running on your computer? Probably. Yes, and one thing to mention that I kind of glossed over at the start is, because this is cart plus API, this will be exported as a /cart route for that app. Cool. So now we've been over web, native, and API code in one code base and how to keep them separate. Think about how powerful this is for web and native. You're going to be sharing code more because they're both UI-based. But for server, you could even have things like utilities functions for dates that you could share between them. And as this is a TypeScript code base, it makes sharing types a lot easier as well. So this is all great hypothetically. How would we deploy these things? This is Leeds Mobile. Everybody knows a thing or two about mobile. So I won't go into too much detail about how we'll deploy a mobile app with this project, but you could use EAS build, platform all, and also submit it to your store. That would be a simple way. There's other ways you could do it. I won't go into too much detail in this case. For the web deployment, you can do npx Expo export. It creates a server-side bundle in your dist folder. You can see that there. So if you're used to building web deployments, you might be familiar with having your products in a dist folder. From that point, you'll need to use an adapter. Currently, there's one for Express, Netfly, and Vercel. These adapters are needed because they export the Expo runtime on the server. Like I say, this is still in beta, so there might be more platforms available. It's still in progress, but it's available from SDK 50, which I think came out February last year. So there's plenty of support, plenty to play around with. And if you've done a bit of playing around, I'm sure you might be familiar with Express servers, so that's something you could use. Yeah. So you can build for as many or as few platforms as you need to. What's an interesting example? They're kind of eating their own dog food here a bit, but the Expo website blog is a great example where they've used an Expo codebase and not even made a mobile app. Or they've kind of built their own website just using Expo Router v3 and the modern technologies. So it's good to see it out in the wild. Yeah, no native components, but interesting case. Cool. That was very quick. I kind of blitzed through that. But anybody got any questions? Anything on the slide? Yeah, go for it.
That was great talk. Thanks so much for that.
No worries.
The question I had was one I've been wondering about for a while, which is when you're sharing that app and that server code, how do you ensure that, like, I guess like you made that point of like utilities, but how do you make sure if you're sharing like data objects between them, that you don't couple them like too tightly? Because I can imagine like if you want to like add a new field to some data object, you're going to have a new app release and a new web release.
Yeah.
To pull through.
Yeah, I guess at that point you kind of want to make your deployments as easy as possible, but that is a very hard problem to solve, basically. So yeah, that's a good question. Anybody else? Nathan?
Yeah, just on the server thing, like maybe I didn't quite understand it.
Yeah.
Or where does that server code end up when you do your build? Because
So it ends up in your dist directory, basically.
so then it was just confusing me because it's
Yeah, no, the mobile app hasn't got the dist directory of the server in it. It's purely, so it is bundled on those EAS build parts to just take in everything with the correct extension that it needs. When you're deploying your API layer, it's just a dist folder that you use an adapter to export into one of the three platforms it can take. Yeah.
You were going through different options for like separating your routing and stuff for web and mobile and things like that.
Yeah.
The special syntax, like if you've got underscore layout, is it also .web.tsx that, or like square brackets id.web.tsx if you wanted to change all of them for one platform, or does it not support it on those special ones?
So if you for the brackets ID, yes.
Yes.
So you could have like brackets ID.native and brackets ID.web. Layout, probably not, because you might end up building platform-specific routes and it not bundling it correctly. So that's when you have to build in those fallbacks, like, oh, I'm on a website page, but I'm an app, what do I do? Or vice versa, like I go to a 404 page, I shouldn't be here. They're kind of error case scenarios that would come up in testing, hopefully, but it's good to build fallbacks for them. Yeah.
How easy is this to support multiple when you try to publish something and you build it all in one way and Apple says yes and Google says no? Like,
Yeah, I mean, we're always at the behest of the Apple and Google gods, unfortunately. For the server code, how easy is it to support? Very hard, because it is still in beta. I'm not going to tell, a big company that they should use the server code. Everything else, a lot of big players have used this tech already. I gave an Expo example, but there's plenty of companies out there. So could you run the website and the app in the wild? 100%. There's a big community around it. It's still moving very quickly. It's pretty exciting. Yep.
This kind of feels like the ultimate mono repo almost.
That's what they're selling us, yeah. That's the dream. That's my code sharing wish list.
And it flies in the face of like most maybe native developers maybe going towards the more
modular approach. Is there any sort of big headline figures on build times and things like that for this? Or?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know. I've only built it on my laptop, if I'm being honest with you. So, yeah. Joe?
Yeah, are you able to touch on how authenticated and unauthenticated routes work with a file-based routing system?
Can you be a bit more specific?
Okay, so typically with like a stack-based router, if your user's authenticated, you'll render one stack or the other. And then with Next.js, with file-based routing, it's middleware-based. It'll check if the client's authenticated from the cookie. Like, how would it work file-based on the client side?
Yeah, it probably would be a case of choosing, it's probably a step back, like, are you authenticated? Should I navigate to this stack or this stack, if you know what I mean?
Redirect the user.
So let's say there's a button on the screen and it takes me somewhere if I'm logged in and somewhere else if I'm not. It would be like, it'd be that component that has that passed in instead of a cookie.
Get from get user route.
Exactly, yeah.
I think you probably use a context. And then, not direct.
Okay, cool.
One for me.
Yeah.
For example, of someone putting these endpoints in like AWS or something, do you run an adapter or?
You could, well, yeah, I don't know if it's open source, I don't know. Could you run an Express app on AWS? Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you do it on AWS? Yes. And it's probably just the sell people on the project who are like, hang on, we can make some money here. Let's make it support Vercel as one of the early adopters. But ultimately, could you run it with open source like AWS? Yeah. Gabby?
Yeah, I haven't seen a project with like the separate web files embedded as well. It sort of feels like that might be quite difficult to manage. Like having those two like completely separate front ends in the same code base. Is it, like, does it feel like it would be worth that trade-off, or for complex stuff would it still be best to keep it separate?
Yeah, you've got to ask yourself, what I want to share and how much of it is shareable and how much of it is platform specific and how much and what my own capabilities. I think if it was something quite simple, I would definitely go down the route of showing these two things. If there's a lot of things on the web that you have to do a lot of hand cranking, you are probably just going towards making two separate things at that point. So yeah, so it's not an easy question. There's no obvious answer to that. I'm not always going to say, yes, do .web and .native. But if there's a lot you can share and there's a lot of similar logic and themes and things like that, then 100% you could do something like this with Expo.
So you can just output to HTML from the React Native?
No, so this is my example here. I wanted to write some, it's not actually a QR code, believe it or not. I wanted to write some HTML for the QR code.web. Because this is .web,
Yeah.
I know I can use things like divs and stuff like that. Whereas if I was going to have it just QR code.tsx and it was going to be targeted at all platforms, it would probably just have to be TypeScript logic and types in there. I wouldn't want to put mobile components or web components in it. Which is good, right? Because there's lots of hooks and things like that in big React projects and stuff like that. Nathan?
So with the traditional stack router, root stack, you can configure deep linking options, and it's all manual, but it's pretty flexible. How does that work with Expo Router?
One thing I will say is it's built on top of React navigation. So everything that's available in there is in Expo v3. So could you do those deep links? Yes. How does it work? I probably couldn't give you a decent breakdown, I'm afraid. Bro? Luke?
So is there a pathway for this to move out of beta? Are there some obvious things that this doesn't support that you know of that they want to add in before they can say, yes, go ahead and build production systems out of this?
Yeah, so just for clarity, the only thing that's in beta is the server stuff. So building your web components and your mobile components are still fully supported. I suspect a big part of it is their deployments. It's not easy to deploy. You need an adapter with the Expo Router v3 runtime. There's only a couple of ways you can do it. I suspect once it gets past that, when deploying it's a lot easier. You can kind of go from there. That's my opinion. But yes, available.
Do they have an opinion? Do they have a sort of a roadmap to say, these are the things that we need to add as capabilities?
Not in their docs, no. I just read, how do I deploy this? And, oh, okay, you can only do it this way. That's a bit crap. Like, this is, yeah. Sorry.
So I found with file-based routing, because it was quite unintuitive, because I'm not from a web background.
Yeah.
I found it was great when it worked, when it didn't work, it was really hard to find out like what's gone wrong. Have you got any tips or tricks for actually debugging?
I went through the same journey, and it's kind of, in my head, I was like, oh, but this always works. I've just got my stack of stuff, and I want to go there, and I'll tell it to navigate there. But then when I kind of took a step back, I was like, well, I guess URL-based routing, like, why don't we have that on mobile? It does seem like the logical way to find things in your app instead of having to navigate through screens and do it programmatically. I think URL-based routing is the way forward personally. Tips for debugging it, though.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's great when it works.
Yeah.
And it just gives you like a, like the page not found, and you can't tell what it's looking for or where it's looking.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could pick that up.
Sorry, I've got any good tips here. It's been a good discussion. All right, mate.
How would you test this with all this bundled together?
You're going to have...
You want to write a test code?
Yeah, so annoyingly, my product app didn't have any unit tests. But, I mean, anything, you can just use Jest. I don't know if you're familiar with Jest. And then if you had, in the QR code example, you could have .web.test.tsx, and then in your native, this.native.test. So you could have specific test files for everything. So it's quite simple in that way.
The same thing with the server code as well?
Yeah. So that would be sort of cart plus API.test.ts. The end-to-end test for the server code, like choose your weapon sort of thing. There's so many out there. You could use automated postman, whatever you want to do. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.